about now? Some blurry picture?
We got it.
Okay. All right, so both Hoplitis and Megachile are relatively bulky bees. So I think of them as the bombers of the bee world. So they're relatively wide. They have both have two submarginal cells. We have a little bit of glare here. So let me see if I can shift our lighting around, and I'll get my card for blocking light. I think by now most of you are pretty aware of what the submarginal cells look like there, but doesn't hurt to repeat. So here's the marginal cell. I'm trying to decrease the glare off there, and here is a submarginal cell and a submarginal cell. So they all have two. The main difference, and because they're in Megachile and they're pollen-carrying bees, the females have their pollen-carrying hair or scopa underneath their abdomen. So in contrast to Andrena and the bulk of other bees who have their pollen-carrying hairs mostly on their legs. Don't forget, Andrena has that side thing going on where the hairs around the corbicula, we would call it, the bare area surrounded by hairs on the back part of the side of the thorax, is also there for carrying pollen. So in Megachile, you see backward slanting hairs, and these often are filled with pollen as the bee goes back to the nest. So that usually there's no problem in detecting whether there are pollen-carrying hairs there or not because of this large mat of slanting hairs. It can be different colors. So at the species level, some species have completely black. Sometimes there's some orange overtones, light orange in the paler colored hair groups, and sometimes a burnt umber orange in the dark ones that modify that. Those are useful and sometimes distinctive. So we usually go and take a look at the scopal hairs first in the females. The females often, but not always, have cutting edges, and I'm going to see if I can find them. I didn't check this out beforehand to see if it was a good example of it. On their mandibles, and at the species level, you'll find that some of the Megachile do not have cutting edges, and I think it bears. I'll have to probably go and come around to another one. A lot of people, if you really have your act together, you would have opened these mandibles up, spread the mandibles when the specimen is fresh. It's almost impossible to do if the specimen is not fresh. I mean, maybe with chlorocreosol, you could soften it enough. The muscle tends to lock on the mandible if they're not fresh. But opening up the mandible allows a better visual of this. I'll maybe, if we have time at the end, I will look for that. But it's going to be difficult to explain what a cutting edge is, I think, without a good visual on it. But it's because they're leaf cutting bees. Those cutting edges are used for cutting out material, usually a green leaf. So this particular Megachile petulans does have cutting edges. Here's tooth 1, tooth 2, but the cutting edge, which would be in there, is not visible in this view. When we get into Megachile ID to species level, we'll look for some specimens that really have a good visual view of the cutting edges, which are often difficult to see, and this is what you're sort of stuck with, because depending on the guide, in Discover Life, we try to not talk too much about cutting edges because they're often if the mandibles are lapped, difficult to see, and sometimes the hairs from the clypeus, as you can see here, are lapping over that, the hairs. But in any case, part of the look and feel of a Megachile, big broad head and very strong mandibles. Strong mandibles to do things with. And they're usually massacrating up vegetation or cutting them to add to their nest. So that's part of the look.
Any tips on how to open the mandibles when they are fresh?
Yeah, so what you would do is if you had a specimen that was fresh, you would hold it in your fingers. So in other words, you wouldn't pin it first, you would hold it in your fingers. And I've seen demonstrations of this. I don't do it mostly myself. And you would hold your fingers behind the head so that the head is stabilized. And you'll get a feel for it so you don't crush the head when you do this. And you stick a pin in between the mandibles and you simply lever the mandibles out. However, if you don't have a hold of the head's just going to pivot back and forth because the mandibles are usually fairly stiff. All right, I'm going to now shift. You can see these often have quite long tongues, and we want to check out the aurolium or lack thereof in this group because that is a way of telling the Megachile from, particularly from Hoplitis, but sometimes other things like dark osmia and other species groups in that family. But mostly the problem is determining whether you have a Megachile or you have a Hoplitis, and you're looking at it. In all B groups, the lack, as this one has, of an aurolium. An aurolium is a pad of tissue of some kind that is between the tarsal claws. So it would be on any of the tarsal claws. You could look for this. So here are the tarsal claws. Here's the tarsus. These are tarsal segments here. There's the other tarsal claw. And there are hairs there. So sometimes those can look pad-like, but we'll see a Hoplitis here in a second. And so Hoplitis has a pad. Megachile very conveniently does not. And so that's the primary means of telling the two groups apart. They have a slightly different feel, but oh gosh, so many times have I seen Hoplitis in the Megachile pile when people are doing identifications. So we'll just take a quick look at the back here. In the females, usually, but not always, there's banding going on. Let me get this out of the way here. On the abdominal segments, those patterns of those bands are often used in ID. And there's a lot of features on the abdomen, the shape of the last segment here. If you look at it from the side in profile, you'll see some of the species have a distinct lip. They're concave. That segment's concave with a very sharply upturned lip along the edge. Others are, like I believe in petulans, they're basically flat across the entire top, but the profile of the last T6 segment is pretty important. Let's go now. So those characters, relatively few characters, the presence of scopal hairs on the underside of the abdomen and the lack of a toe pad, or in other words, the lack of an aurolium, are pretty much give you the answer that that's a Megachile. There are other groups like Amphidium in Megachilidae that do have no toe pad. Amphidium comes to mind. There might be a couple others, but they're uncommon too. But they're very brightly colored. So within Megachile, I believe, at least in the females, that none of them have anything. They don't have any white, yellow, or red markings. The base is always dark and mostly they're just a flat black. But in a few cases, I'm thinking of one that probably was introduced on the Hawaiian Islands that I've come across. There's a metallic sheen to the integument, but basically they're dark and they don't have markings, and that keeps you away from getting confused with the Megachile, other Megachile groups that are around in common, the Amphidioines. So here we have a male, again, a petulans, and we're going to talk about a couple things. First of all, we'll just zoom in there and we'll look at the lack of the toe pad again, just so you get some visuals on that. So again, no toe pad, tarsal claw, nothing in between. There might be a few hairs. This is a random piece of detritus. So if we back off again, you won't see scopal hairs because it's a male. The basic body shape is similar, broad. It's dark also too. The hair bands are important on here. There is always something going on. I can't think of no exceptions back here on T6. So the tergite number 6. And in this case, it could vary an awful lot. But in this particular case, what we're looking at is the small white hairs, whether there's hairs there or not, is a good indicator of the, and I should show you a better shot of this, a good indicator, because I think we were looking at basically at T5 there, a good indicator of different species groups. Okay, so here's a better shot. So this segment is T5. We were looking at that inadvertently. And here is T6. So at the end of T6, this is a flange, and we're going to turn it over so you can see this better. So this area, if you were looking at it, and most of the species have a notch coming out of it like this. That can vary, some do not. And the shape of the notch is sometimes a good indicator for a particular species. The presence of white hairs or not is also useful. But you would, I think, naturally think of this as the rim of the segment of T6 because it's very large and prominent, but it's not. This is actually a flange. The true rim, or the true edge of the apical edge of T6 is hidden underneath here. You have to actually turn the specimen over to see the true rim. And there are features, particularly in the east when we're working with Megachile, Texana, brevis, or Mendica, that you need to look at the true rim because there's often tiny little projecting teeth there that help with ID. So to do that, let's see if we can flip this over here. Stick it into the clay. And we got some leg issues going on here that make it difficult, but I think we want to actually turn it even more severely over. So this is, it's good to point out that this is one of the reasons that you do insect ID with your fingers. So you're holding the specimen. I'm not because it's too jumpy under the microscope video feed, but you would hold this under your fingers so you can completely do a 180 on the specimen and look underneath to see the characters on the underside. So these are the sternites down here. In this particular one, this particular instance, what we would be looking at, and I'm giving you some reference here. This is T5, so tergite 5. This is T6. We were just looking at this. Here's the flange, right? So this big area, there's the notch out, but you can see it's a projecting shelf, sometimes called lamellate. And the true rim, though, is down here. So this species, maybe a little bit difficult to see here, also has tiny little teeth along this rim. I'm going to shift in a second to a slightly different angle on this. But yeah, so this sometimes the species ID hinges on this true rim area and going to be frustrating, particularly when you're starting out, because you would want to look at this because it's so obvious, but it's actually this area under here that you're looking at. And sometimes you even are going to play around with T7, which is below here and often expresses itself as a relatively small segment that actually looks more like a sternite than it does like a tergite, and it has can have notches and flanges on it too. That's rarer in the species ID, but almost all Megachile are going to have this flange, and it'll be different sizes and shapes, and it will be express itself in different ways. But this is where you will spend a lot of time looking. I'm going to try and shift this a little bit, see if we can get another shot of the rim. Have some leg issues. Let's see if I can basically snap off some legs here. Petulance, very common, so I don't feel too bad about, but I can see that about snapping a few legs off for science.
Any questions while he is manipulating the specimen?
Or destroying the specimen. Okay, so hopefully we can see a little bit better now. Not a whole lot. That one leg. Let's see if I can do it by looking online. Pin, moving in. I feel like my 3D skills are being challenged. I think I got it. Okay, going back.
There we go.
Yeah, so this is another thing, which is if your primary reason for looking at bees is to identify them correctly, and so they can go into a database for a program rather than putting them all in a museum, sometimes doing things like snapping off a few legs, bending out and breaking the wing so that it's not covering the abdomen, or even snapping an abdomen off is okay. You can glue that back onto a label, the missing part, or it may be that you don't actually need that to begin with, as terms of a final product isn't a set of specimens a la museum quality, although we like museum quality things, but it is more about the database. All right, what are we looking at here? Let's see, we can play around a little bit on some lighting. All right, so this is the flange. Lots of interesting things go on here. And then this is the true rim here. And I don't think we can see T. So this is all T6. All from here to here is T6.
Lighting. There we go.
Okay. And then T7 would be in here, but I don't see it. So I think it's retracted, I'm going to say. Here on this true rim, you can see vaguely that there are two teeth in this in petulans, and I believe they lack what are often called lateral teeth that show up in Mendica and brevis and a couple others groups out here too. So just because this is tricky, so we're just spending a little extra time here so you can orient yourself to that segment. All right, so if we return, I'm going to show you on this specimen relatively unmodified front tarsal segments, and then I'll show you a Megachile xylocopoides that is highly altered. Let me zip this down and get this thing out of the way.
Just a reminder for people who have joined the chat in the last 5 minutes or so, we're looking at a male.
Yeah, sorry, it is a male. got a lot of brightness here.
Do females also have the flange?
No. Well, they don't in the way that the males are expressing it. So the edge in some groups, like Exilus and Campanuli and Georgica, the rim, this is the true rim of T6 is bent up. In others, it's absolutely straight, and some are concave and some are convex even. So it is a useful segment, but they never have that flange like the males do. Okay, so now we're looking at petulance, same specimen. And in this case, we're looking at the front. Here is the tarsal area, and no, these are the tarsal segments. This is the tarsus, and the femur is back here. And I'm going to do this I'm showing you this to contrast it with this next specimen. So in some males, and this is often, again, a good character, there's a lot of expansion and even coloration of the, move that back to its house, of the front legs, particularly the tarsus and sometimes the tarsal segments, or maybe it's always the tarsal segments. Anyway, here is Megachile, Thylacopoides, a very black bee in general. So making its incredibly white and expanded forelegs even, and I'm going to play with the lighting here, even more dramatic in its presentation. So what's going on is, at least in some of these species, so if you can see that there, when we get a little bit less light on that, there's a lot going on. I believe these are the tarsal segments that have been completely expanded out in a large and obvious way. And I'm going to change some lighting back and forth so you can see that there's a lot of structure in there. That's used in lots of cases for ID, the obvious. So you have some that have basically no modifications and others where that is highly modified, and something like that. And some are light colored and some are dark colored. There's often hair patches of interest and not. There's a bunch of other features on both males and females, and we'll get into those, such as spurs on the front coccyx and things like that, that are useful and distinctive, but at the species level, at the genus level, trying to ID them, these are the features that we're going to concentrate on. So at this point, I'm going to try and see if in this very dark male Thylacopoides, we can see something. Sometimes with these dark specimens, it's hard to get enough contrast to see what's going on. But we're back in that area again. But I'm having some problems because, oh, maybe this will be a good one. Getting to see the definition. Yeah, lots of. Let's see if I can do something here. So just orientation. This is T6. Here's a wider cutout in this particular case, and that's the flange rim. It's a little less abrupt and sticking out, and the true rim is under that. I'm not sure I want to spend too much more time on this specimen, although I'm going to try and flip it underneath. There are no legs in the way, and see if we can get a better shot in that direction. Yeah, it's pretty hard to see what's going on. So I'm not 100% sure. I believe this is the edge of the true rim. This, let's see if I can change the lighting a little bit. This area through here is the flange of the segment. Yeah, the lighting here is problematic because of the dark and the shine on it. So I'm not sure I can show that to you. Okay, we're skipping that. But the expanded foretarsi often shows up in this group, and almost always will indicate that that's going to be a megachile. I'm trying to think if this ever occurs in Hoplitis, which I'm going to show you now. So Hoplitis, if we're talking generalities, tends to, pull this off here, tends to be a little bit thinner. But again, the difference is depending on the particular species, particularly in the east when you're dealing with Hoplitis, pelosifrons and producta, the females look almost as wide as the Megachile, and some groups of Megachile, I'm thinking Exilus and Campanuli again, are relatively skinny compared to the ones we just saw. So there's this overlap in size and shape. But again, you have scopal hairs underneath, tends not to be as long and as slanty as in others. But and it will have two submarginal cells. But the key difference is right there between the tarsal claws. And that is a very clear and distinct pad, or the aurolium, that we can see there. So if we are looking here, tarsal claw, the other tarsal claw is projecting towards us, and here's this pad between. I'm going to shift this now a little bit. See if there's another tarsal claw that we can see too. Turn it this way towards us. Maybe. Darn, specimens are always curled up. That's the reality of specimens that are just washed and dried and then pinned instead of spread. But few people have time for that level of prep. I'll try this direction. Oh, maybe upside down. Will get us a nice aurolium shot. You've seen this in a couple of the other classes.
Do we know how the tarsal pads are used?
I do not.
Jean, are you on? You're usually pretty good at finding some citations for us. Send stuff in emails.
Right. We usually have some nice follow-up. And Claire did a great job on explaining the differences in weak veins and strong veins and hair bands under and hair bands along the rim in Hoplitis and lazy glossum. Did you send that out, Claire?
I sent it out and I've asked for review. I sent out 2 versions that have different ways of highlighting those features.
So this is a good shot. So here's the tarsal claws, relatively thick, and then here's this relatively nice and round pad in between. So if it has a pad, it's not a megachile. If it looks like megachile and has a pad, it's probably going to be Hoplitis. If we have a second today, I will show you a Lithurgis, which in the east is very rare, but because there's an invasive species moving in, we may see more of it. And so that's something to think about. Within Hoplitis.
Heloise informs us that the rolium are used for locomotion on smooth surfaces and the claws are for rough surfaces.
There you go. So
And
I guess Megachile don't hang out on smooth surfaces very much.
And then the other question that we have now, are the pads always light colored?
I'm not sure about that. Usually you're looking at the pads as a contrast to the background. In other words, you're looking at a silhouette. I often stick my finger behind something like that, a wing or a toe pad, and just use, because that increases the contrast with the background, depending on what your background is, and I can see that better. Another group, which we're not bringing in here today, that can be also confused with Hoplitis is Osmia. So I think most of you know that Osmia are most of the time are a blue or a blue-green metallic color, whatever metallic means to the person, as we talked about last time. But some of the members are either, let's call it barely metallic or outright black. Those tend to be more northern, but you know, people do study bees in northern areas, and also out west, there's more of that kind of group. However, you can tell Hoplitis from Osmia always by the presence of the parapsidyl line. So here's a central line, here's another line to the side. I'm going to say that almost all bees have this, maybe all of them have that. In Osmia, it is so reduced as to become the size of it looks like a slightly larger modified pit. It really is only about one pit in length. And then there's a secondary group that has the parapsidyl line is only 2 or 3 pits long. And but they never, so Osmia has these really short parapsidyl lines, which really are not lines. They're just kind of little tiny blobs. And all the rest of the species, including Hoplitis, which would be another confusing area between Osmia and Hoplitis, have something linear. It's not showing up well. Again, we have the very dark integument problem. Let's see if we can move it askance here. But if you look at any specimen, you'll see this. And so every once in a while you can get in trouble with very dark osmias in terms of confusing them, because they'll have the toe pad too with Hoplitis. So roughly, again, here's the parapsidyl line. It's not showing well. It's more visible under the scope when lighting conditions can be varied by moving your fingers. And online we have a sort of a dumbing down of the image anyway. The mandibles on Hoplitis are going to look very similar to Osmia as well as Megachile. They're robust. I don't know if it's going to show up very well here. They're robust, and I believe have cutting edges, although I don't really spend any time looking at the mandibles. They, as a feature, yeah, they're pretty robust too. As a feature, so that's an antenna in the way, but that's the mandible.
Not the antenna in the way, we might be able to see a cutting edge, because that's definitely.
No, that's pretty good. Let me just flick that antenna off. If I can get there. Oh my gosh, so close. There we go. Yeah, I really don't spend time with Hoplitis much. in the, but this is Hoplitis spoliata, so this is a good example. This has 4 teeth, 1, 2, 3, 4, and at the species level, there are relatively few Hoplitis with 4 teeth, so that often is a good separator. Here you can see the lower mandible. I don't see any cutting edges in there, so I'm going to say maybe not. Osmia and Megachile definitely do, and that's they're using an ID, and that's probably why we don't bother with Hoplitis, because maybe their lack of cutting edges is not very useful. At the rear end in this group, to sort of give you, this is a female again, and what I'm going to show you is something that shows up sometimes in Megachile too, but it's just this different shape to the female's backside. Let's see if we can cut down on a little bit of light there. So you can see how the segment comes down and then lips out like that. That shape in Hoplitis is often useful, or lack of that shape is useful in separating out different species groups. So you have in the females, you have scopal hairs. On the underside, you have an aurolium, you have a all dark B, and you have long prepsidal lines. That takes care of most of the problems. And just to give you a hint about Lithurgis and Lithurgopsis groups, they have 3 teeth that are all towards the tip of the clustered towards the tip. And again, if I have time, I'll show you that. But we certainly will circle back onto that group, probably maybe when we do Osmia, which might be maybe next time. People can vote on that. Let me show you that basically there is a lot going on in the males in Hoplitis. So depending on the species, again, there's nothing that at the genus level is useful, but the males often have modified in a interesting variety of ways. Again, we're looking at spoliata here, but here's a male, scape, pedicel, here's the antennal segments, and you can see that they start about the same width as the pedicel, as most insects do. Then in this particular one, it expands out greatly and then tapers off. It's difficult to see on that side as you go forward. And that pretty much, with one northern exception, tells you that this, the bee you're looking at is spoliata in the male. Hard to see here because the antenna is bent over, but there we have this widely expanded antennal segments, which is unusual. In other species, the tips of the antenna are sharply curved over, and they form almost hooks at the end. And in, I'm going to say, all of the Hoplitis males, the last abdominal segment is modified in some way to create a often very distinctive shape. So at the species level, this is often used for identification. In spoliata, what we're looking at is this last segment. I don't know if that's T6 or T7 on the specimen, and in some it's wide and round, others have multiple points, others have one large point going on there. So in the males in general within Megachile, this one appears to be, because the antenna is so distinctive, I really look at the rear end of spoliata. This appears to just be a smooth edge, but a lot of convolutions can occur on those. Additionally, there is often a lot going on in Hoplitis on the sternites. So there can be hair patterns, there can be modifications. So for example, the Hoplitis producta has a produced, so produced means a jutting out segment on the underside. I think it's, I'm going to say S2, and it clearly goes out quite a distance as a peak, and others have mounds. And so there's usually a bunch of ID features and ID options, therefore, within Hoplitis to tell the species groups apart. But of course, there are similar members within Hoplitis where the species pairs can be tricky to tell apart. But across the membership in Hoplitis, there's often vast differences in their presentation. For example, Spoliata is quite large, and there are some pretty tiny Hoplitis species out there too.
We have a question.
Yep.
Is it easy to distinguish between Hoplitis and Adiposmia?
I don't know. That's Adiposmia is a Western species. I have no experience with it, but I believe that, and someone should chime in on the chat there or can speak up, but I believe that it has in the male a oddly modified sternite segment, but I'm really guessing right now, so I should probably have said nothing. So I can't tell you. There is a way, and it's in the guide, and I have seen specimens long ago, but it's not something I run into. It's not an Eastern species or genus at all. I'm going to pull a Lithurgis, because we have a little bit of time here, to point that out. Let's see here.
There are questions in the chat while he's looking for something.
So Lithurgis was split not too terribly long ago into Lithurgis and Lithurgopsis. So the basic pattern was the old world's species are Lithurgis and the new ones are Lithurgopsis. I forget how you tell the two apart. We have both thanks to an introduction. Well, we have both in the US, but not in the same geographic location. Longer story, but there is a introduced species of Lithurgis, Lithurgis chrysopsis, is that right? Chrysurus, that is right now been found in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and maybe New York. We don't have any records for Maryland. I know none of for Delaware either, but the expectations are that they're moving that way. Interestingly, they can plow and chew into live, or not live, but solid wood. So they can make holes in pine and cedar and things like that, very similar to what carpenter bees can do. And they have damaged some historic structures already. And there's some pretty interesting stories out there. Okay, so the key is it looks like a Megachile. Like you would see this, like this looks like a Megachile, but its teeth are really different. So trying to see, that looks like a triangulin, but there should be 3 teeth. So that would be tooth 1, a central tooth, and then a third tooth there. I'm going to rotate it, and this one is lapped over, but it has 1, 2, 3, all towards the tip. And that should be true of our Western friend too. Let's see, I'm running out of room here. Let me try it from above. So keep your eyes peeled for this.
Tim informs
species.
us that T1 of Adiposmia is concave, unlike Hoplitis.
Oh, okay. Thank you. In the females and the males?
I'll let you know when
Right.
we get that.
And it's in the, I mean, it's separated in the guide, but I basically was following, I think, Michener's advice or something like that.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm trying to get this teeth thing set so that it's not so glary. Again, probably need to put more. Let's back up a little bit here. Maybe that'll be better. You can the mandibles just look really different. They have no cutting edges, and I'm guessing that the three tooth at the tip helps them, carve out wood on the females. Anyway, let's see if I bend it this way. Oh, maybe that'll work. Yeah, you can't quite get the whole three of them in one picture because they slant off to one side. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and then the other mandible here, base is running underneath. But your spider senses should be tingling when you're looking at something that has the mandibles like this. But if we look at the specimen as a whole, it looks very much like, oh, why did it go white? Very much like a Megachile. And that would be the first call, I think, for anyone. It's about the size of a honeybee. And just for this particular invasive species, just so you have another vibe on it, the rear ends of the females have a bit of reddishness to them. So, which I'm trying to think, I don't think any Megachile have that, or Hoplitis for that matter. And see that little weird tuft of hairs too. So it's, when you're looking at this, you would probably think, oh, something's off here. Trying to get that in focus a little bit, but there's this bit of reddishness there that shows up pretty nicely. I think the males have 3 teeth too. I'm going to see if I have any in there. I think I do, but we'll just do a quick look. I believe they also have a toe pad between their tarsal claws. If they have tarsal claws, that specimen seems to not have any there. I see some on that side. And someone could look on the guide and see if that when you click on lacking toe pads.
What species we're looking at right now?
This is Lithurgis, Chrysalis.
So
Let's see.
That's the old world species that was brought over and is in
Right, eating houses. Actually, it doesn't look like there's a toe pad. So we should check the guide out. I think I've seen this species only a few times from those areas up in New Jersey, and that was like 15 years ago. Okay, so let me so the guide would tell you whether it's got an aurolium there or not, but it may not. Let's go see if we can find a nice little male here to look at. And I'm just holding it with my fingers. Yeah, they first discovered it in the 70s when it had almost completely destroyed a house.
Wow.
By chewing up the exterior siding on it. And of course, they aggregate, in other words, their nesting habits. And other people now have discovered them in wood piles and in covered bridges. So if you have a covered bridge, watch out. So this looks like the, I should just look at it under the microscope the regular way. Oh, interesting. There's a little pointy thing at the end of it. And that's scientific. Let me take this off and let's look at the mandible. Yeah, I don't know if there's another separate feature for the males. Like, I don't know if it has the 3 tridentate tip to it too. I need to get a different specimen because the legs are completely in the way there. Let's look at this one. Again, the guide would have some. Oh, here's a nice shot. Oh, it does have 3. All right, let's take a look at this one. Even in the male, apparently, it has these 3 at the end, a very different look. Oh, nice. Finally, a good shot here. I'm going to zoom in. So you can see there's a couple other groups. So Anthophora terminalis has a very similar look, but of course it's from a completely different family of bees. So 1, 2, and 3 at the end of the mandible, and you have a Lithurgis chrysuris in this case, and I'm going to zoom in on this distinctive pointy rear end thing that it had going on, I believe. So yeah, there's a different, instead of having that a flange that we were seeing, although that could be considered a flange. We have that, and if we look now, so this species, while found in New Jersey right now, there's no reason that it couldn't show up anywhere in the country through the movement of firewood, because it's been documented to nest in old pieces of firewood. Yeah, it looks like it actually does not, so that would be confusing. If you saw no aurolium, you'd say Megachile, but in this case, Lithurgis has no, I don't know if Lithurgopsis does too.
We have an answer to that.
Okay.
E. Lambourne informs us that Carroll and Wilson say that aureolia in male Lithurgis is absent, while present in Lithurgopsis fore and mid legs.
Ah, there we go.
Very specific.
Yep. I vaguely remember that. Again, that should be, so there's a way in the guide to tell Lithurgis from Lithurgopsis, but anyway, there's an introduction, and I think we're running out of time, to Lithurgis, Hoplitis, and Megachile, with lots of fun details when you go to the species level.
We have a few minutes left. I don't have any questions in the chat. Sam, if you want to turn on your speaker, if anybody wants to speak up, they'll be heard. Anybody? Roxanne, you're free to unmute.
So I'm wondering if the front legs on the male Megachile, are they for mating, like to hold the female?
Yes, so they're involved in mating. The general impression, and there may be studies that document this more, is those greatly expanded ones are just the right size to completely cover the eyes of the female. Exactly why, I'm not sure, but that it appears to be that is its immediate function, and how that works and why they would have developed that, I don't really know. And then obviously in some Megachile don't have that whatsoever.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, Claire, I don't know if we have any other people with questions.
I don't have any questions in the chat. We have another one. You're in your last minute. Final words. I guess we have a bunch of Megachile, Hoplitis, Lithurgis experts now.
Maybe
This is why I should do the Quizlets.
we'll put ourselves out of business. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to stop recording. We'll be here until the recording finishes downloading. Do you have any last minute questions? Please give me some feedback on what kind of resources are useful to you. Oh, and I forgot to say, I put, Roxanne, you can, I might unmute in a second. I also put some pictures of some screenshots from last week's class that in the files, but I haven't refined them in an editor yet. So they're there, but better versions to come. Roxanne, did you have another thing to say?
Can I just interject one thing, which is that anytime when you're using the guides and you run into a question that, sometimes they're actually wrong, they haven't been scored completely, or there's some mistakes, or you think the scoring needs to be broadened. But also if it's confusing. So if you think, oh, the wording is confusing, or I could really use a picture, we're starting now, actually Claire is starting to add more photographs to illuminate the characters that we're talking about. So upvote that by emailing Claire, and we'll move in that direction.
Yep, that's literally my job right now. Roxanne, did you have another thing?
I'm sorry, I didn't. I accidentally pressed it. I can't put comments in the chat, so I was trying to figure out how to do that.
Oh, that's that probably should have been solved by our new link. Why don't we talk about that offline? I'm not sure how to troubleshoot that right now.
Is it, well, let's ask, is anyone else having? They could either put a vote thing or some kind of signal, or just speak out. Maybe that's the only way you can talk. Is anyone else having problems putting in comments in the chat? Because it turns out the chat is pretty useful sometimes.
While we're doing this, I'm going to stop recording because that makes sense.
Okay.